Well, this evening's scripture is from the Gospel of Matthew. And typically what I do is I put the verses up here on the screen. We're going to do a little something different tonight. And by the way, that is a picture of my family, which I didn't tell them about. So I'm in the very back, little head sticking up. Because tonight's scripture is the genealogy of Jesus from Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 through 16, I thought I'd give you the visual representation instead of putting the verses on. The Gospel of Matthew, beginning in verse 1 of chapter 1. A record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Hold on. Isaac was the father. Oh, this was just working. All right. Isaac was the father of Jacob. Jacob, the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah was the father of Perez, whose mother was Tamar. Perez, the father of Hezron. Hezron, the father of Ram. Ram, the father of Amminadab. Amminadab, the father of Nahshon. Oh, we're having all sorts of fun tonight. All right. Nahshon, the father of Salmon. Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse. Jesse, the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother was Uriah's wife. Solomon, the father of Rehoboam. Rehoboam was the father of Abijah. Abijah, the father of Asa. Asa, the father of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat, the father of Jehoram. Jehoram, the father of Uzziah. Uzziah, the father of Jotham. Jotham, the father of Ahaz. Ahaz, the father of Hezekiah. Hezekiah, the father of Manasseh. Manasseh, the father of Amon. Amon, the father of Josiah. And Josiah, the father of Jehoiakim, who was king at the time of the exile. After the exile to Babylon, Jehoiakim was the father of Shealtiel. Shealtiel, the father of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel, the father of Abiad. Abiad, the father of Eliakim. Eliakim, the father of Azor. Azor, the father of Zadok. Zadok, the father of Akim. Akim, the father of Eliad. Eliad, the father of Eleazar. Eleazar, the father of Mattathan. Mattathan, the father of Jacob. And Jacob, the father of Joseph, whose wife, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called the Christ. This is God's word for us this evening. Right, we're getting rid of that one.
Did you have those names right?
You don't know. Why did God come to us as He did? Why did God humble Himself and take on human flesh? More than that, why didn't Jesus, who is God incarnate, God in the flesh, why didn't He just appear on earth? Why did He have to become human? Why did He become human all the way back to becoming a baby, a fetus, an embryo, even back to being a zygote? Why? Well, that is the beauty and mystery of Christmas. But this is not a mystery with no answers. God has answered many of those questions for us through Jesus and through the Scriptures, in which we learn that humans have a very hard time communicating with an all-powerful, all-righteous, holy God. God is so vastly other, so vastly transcendent, that in the Old Testament, God would speak to His people through mediators, called the prophets. But even then, there was still a lot left to be desired. But with Jesus, that desire was met. God was able to become one of us so that He could better hear and understand who God is. As I said in the children's message, if you want to know what God is like, we are to look at Jesus. But Jesus came to be more than just a mouthpiece for God. He came for more than that. Jesus did not need to be human to do that. Jesus did indeed, however, need to be fully human to be our representative. Now, many of you know Nick Smith. He's the one who was just mouthing off up here. Just like in Congress, he liked to voice his opinion, right? He was our representative in the U.S. House of Representatives for how many years? 12 years, absolutely. And he represented us by his words and by his voice. But for him to be our representative means that he had to be from here. He had to be living here. He couldn't be living in Canada. No offense, Canada's beautiful. Or Florida or something. He had to be one of us. He had to be from here. In a similar way, Jesus was, if he was going to be our representative before God the Father, he had to be truly one of us. He had to be fully human in every way that we are human, except for sin. And just as our ancient father Adam was also a representative for us, whose decision to sin and disobey God in the Garden of Eden radically affected everyone after him, so too Jesus was our second representative before God, whose decisions and actions would affect many as well. Again, since Jesus was fully human, he was qualified to be our representative. But unlike Adam, who sin led us away from God, Jesus' actions were able to open up a way for us to draw near to God, for God to bring us back to himself. You see, God, being completely holy and just, could not allow sin and disobedience toward each other and toward him to go unpunished, to be swept under the rug. If God did that, he wouldn't be perfect, and thus he wouldn't be God. But on the other hand, God is merciful, and God is loving. So God the Father sent Jesus, who is God the Son, to be our representative, to take the punishment and judgment that our sin rightly deserves. So Jesus' birth is a necessary part of this great redemption story that runs through the whole Bible, because it was necessary for Jesus to become fully human like us in every way, which includes being born through a human mother. Now, this fact that Jesus is fully human and born to Mary also means that Jesus had relatives, even a genealogy. Now, over the last few weeks, the last few Sundays, we've walked through Jesus' family tree, which spans the whole Old Testament all the way back to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. So this got me thinking about my family tree. While Kim and I lived out in Boston, we took a small class on researching your genealogy. We learned all about census data, and we learned about birth, marriage, and death certificates. But we also learned how to type in www.ancestry.com, and that makes things a lot easier and quicker. Especially for me, because one of my mom's cousins, I want to say, had done a lot of research already into our family. And so I could trace my family, one of my family lines, all the way back to this guy, David Deussen, who lived in Aube, France in 1490. All the way back, 525 years ago. And I found out that his great-great-grandson, Nicholas Baron, he immigrated from Villeneuve, France to Quebec somewhere in the 17th century. And his great-great-grandson, Pierre Bernier, he was the one who came from Quebec to Detroit in 1801. And his great-great-granddaughter is my grandma, Dolores LaForest, who's now Dolores Dunsmore, who had my mom, Denise, I won't give you the dates on that, all right, who had me. You see, I'm the one with the actual picture right there. So, now the one thing that we, among other things, that we don't get to choose in this life is we don't get to choose who our ancestors are. You're born with your ancestors. That's just the way it works. The names who appear in this list before me, I was just stuck with. All right? But that wasn't the case for Jesus. You see, Jesus is fully God. He could choose who he was going to have to be his ancestors, which is kind of a weird thing to think about, but it's an amazing thing to consider. Now, I'm guessing if we had the power to pick our ancestors, to choose who would be in our family tree, we'd probably see some names on there like, like Rockefeller or Vanderbilt, maybe Washington or Lincoln or Einstein or Newton. we would want to give ourselves the best we could. Great genes, powerful legacies, large inheritances. Now, of course, we can't do that, but Jesus could. And since this is a genealogy for Jesus Christ, the God incarnate, the Son of God, we would expect nothing less than the greatest, most famous, best ancestors around. And we do find some of those in Jesus' family tree. We have some of the most important people in the Bible found in this genealogy. We have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs of God's people. Powerful, famous, and righteous. We have Judah, one of the 12 sons of Jacob, who a tribe is named after. We also have Boaz from the book of Ruth, who is a model for us what it means to be godly and wise. There's King David and King Solomon. Talk about powerful and famous. They were the height of Israel's power and influence and wealth. And of course, after them is a line of 12 kings, many of whom were good leaders who sought God and followed after him. But, interestingly enough, Jesus' family tree also includes a lot of just ordinary people who are completely unknown to us. In fact, the last third of the genealogy, basically here, this part right here, we only know 2 names on that list. You have Zerubbabel, this guy right there. He was governor for the Israelites when they came back from the Babylonian exile. And of course we have Joseph, husband of Mary. But that's it. The rest of them are completely unknown to us. And that's the only time their names appear in the Bible. Okay, so maybe they weren't all powerful and famous, but at least they were all going to be righteous and godly, right? I mean, this is Jesus' genealogy we're talking about. Well, actually, that's not the case at all. In fact, Jesus' family tree has a number of skeletons in the closet. And really, that's a wrong term to use, because skeletons in the closet implies that something's hidden. But for Jesus, nothing was hidden. Because the Jews would have known in Jesus' day. Because they were Jews, and they knew their Old Testament, and these names would have been known to them. People like, for example, King Rehoboam, who was crude, power-hungry, and foolish. Under his rule, he saw 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel secede from the country to form their own. And again, this was at the height of Israel's power. I mean, he was King Solomon's son and King David's grandson. It's already messed up. We have people like King Ahaz, right there. He would completely reject God. Oh, this guy was wicked and bad news. So bad that he turned to idols and false gods, even to the point of offering his own son as a, as a child sacrifice to the pagan god Moloch. Another one of the kings, King Manasseh, also followed in these ways, placing false gods and idols in the very temple, God's holy temple in Jerusalem. He also dove headfirst into occult activities such as sorcery and mediums. And certainly back to those names that seem to be good names, like Abraham, Jacob, Judah, David, Solomon, they weren't perfect either. They may not have been as bad as Rehoboam or Ahaz or Manasseh, but they did some really stupid things. Abraham, not once but twice, had his wife pretend to be his sister and marry a pharaoh of Egypt to save his own skin. Jacob was a known deceiver who didn't deceive strangers but manipulated his own family to get what he wanted. Judah plotted with his brothers to sell their other brother Joseph into slavery. David, of course, had an affair with a married woman, got her pregnant, and then had the woman's husband killed. And Solomon was a man of untamed lust who married over 1,000 women and fell into idolatry to make his foreign wives happy. Friends, Jesus' family tree is messy. And it's also a bit surprising, too. You see, in ancient genealogies, not just in Israel, but there are other nations around them as well, usually women were not included. Only the male descendants were included. But here in Matthew's genealogy of Jesus, he includes 5 women. And again, we would expect these to be some of the great women of the faith, like Mary and Ruth, who are included. But we also have Tamar, who seduced her father-in-law. We have Rahab, who was a woman of the night. We got little ears here. My wife said, no, you can't use that other word I was going to use, all right? And then, of course, we have Bathsheba, who had committed adultery with King David. And on top of that, most of these women were not even Israelites. They were foreigners. Tamar was Aramean, Rahab was a Canaanite, Ruth was a Moabite, and Bathsheba was either a Hittite or at least she was married to a Hittite. What all this means is that Jesus' line was not pure racially, nationally, spiritually, or morally. Yes, it includes some very famous people like the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and King David, and all the line of kings after him. But it also included ordinary nobodies. Yes, Jesus' genealogy included some saints like Father Abraham, who demonstrated faith in God over and over, and King David, who wrote the Psalms and loved God with all his heart. But even they, of course, were prone to sin as well, even big sins. Yes, it included many Israelites, but it also included several foreign women whose blood flows through Jesus. Friends, I chose this passage to share with you tonight as a reminder of two things. First is that Jesus is more like you than you think. Jesus is more like you than you think. He was fully human, which included having some messed up family dynamics. And skeletons in his closet too, his family closet. So if any of you out there are feeling like you got some messed up family things going on, know that Jesus knows what that's like. He knows the hurts and pains and the stains that family can cause. But secondly, I also say all this to highlight that God could have picked only the best and brightest. He could have picked the wisest and holiest to be his own ancestors, but he didn't. He also included the nobodies, the outsiders, and the sinners as well. People who don't have it all together, who don't have all the privileges, the people who are overlooked and forgotten. They too are part of God's great plan of salvation. Each of these names on this genealogy are a necessary link that leads us to Jesus. Friends, in the same way that God called and worked through the names on this genealogy, God still calls the nobodies, the outsiders, and the sinners to come to him today as well. No one is too far from God that he cannot be brought near to God. If you feel forgotten tonight, know that God has not forgotten you. If you feel like an outsider tonight, know that God's door stands open and he's there waiting to welcome you in. If you feel like you are not good enough for God, know that it is exactly right and it's exactly how you should feel. Because none of us are good enough for God. But the good news is that Christianity is not about making yourself good enough for God. That's what the other religions of the world are like, not Christianity. In Christianity, it's about coming to God just as messed up as you are, and it's about him making you good, not you making yourself good for God. If Jesus' family tree is big enough to include some of the people I mentioned tonight, it's big enough to include you as well. And that's where I'd like to leave you tonight. The truth is that Jesus had no biological children. So you might think that his family tree ended with him. But Jesus was not just a son of man. He was also the Son of God. Which means that you do not need to be of a certain heritage, a certain family line, to be part of Jesus' family tree. In fact, you can't become part of God's family through merely being born. In the beginning of John's Gospel, John writes this. It actually was part of our responsive reading tonight. John 1:12-13, John says, "Yet to all who receive him, to those who believe in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God." Friends, becoming part of God's family, part of Jesus' family tree, is as simple as this verse. It is believing who Jesus said he was and what he did. He is God in human flesh, who lived a perfect life, died on the cross for us, and rose again from the dead. But it's more than just believing facts about God. John tells us it's also about receiving him personally. to all who receive him, to those who believe in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. So I ask you, have you received Jesus personally? This is not something you are born into. It's not something you inherit from your parents or grandparents. Each of us must decide to receive Christ or not. There is no other way. As C.S. Lewis said, the Son of God became man so that men could become sons of God. And that is God's greatest gift to you this Christmas, is the gift of himself. Since there is nothing greater than God, if he's going to give you the greatest thing he can, it has to be himself. So tonight, let us rejoice that God stands ready to give you this gift. Therefore, receive it by faith, for this gift is for all of us, including the nobodies, the outsiders, and the sinners alike. Amen? Amen.